Live from the palatial studios at Emerson College in beautiful downtown Boston, this is the Jeff Santos Show on the Revolution Radio Network. Rebuilding America, together, investing, activism. Now, here's Jeff.
It is hour 3 of the Jeff Santos Show. Welcome to it. If you enjoyed the last hour we did with Rona Freed and Mark Fogel of Greenpeace, Research Director of Greenpeace USA, you can go to Jeff Santos, you can go to revolutionradionetwork.com and check out our podcasts. We repeat the show coming up at 4 o'clock Eastern Time, the 1 o'clock hour, which featured Robert Craig and some commentary and so forth will be repeated. And then at 2 o'clock, which is 5 o'clock Eastern Time, we'll play that look back at the environment anniversary of Earth Day, anniversary of the EPA, founded from 1970 as well. But now we go out to Seattle, WA, where it is green because of the rain. And it is always good to talk to our great independent journalist, Haley Coase, works for Capitol Hill Times in Seattle, and he is a regular here on the Jeff Santos Show. It's time for MTC, Mark Taylor-Canfield, and his intro song. Happy Sunday, Mark.
Hey, Jeff. I hope everybody had a good Earth Day, and thanks for playing my song, Ron. We got Trump.
You got Trump, yeah. Exactly.
We got Trump. Yeah, we all got Trump.
Yeah, I guess it's like it's kind of like a poker hand, but more like gin rummy or bridge.
All good, my friend. Well, Mark, you know, we often talk about Seattle leading the way on $15 minimum wage, or the Bernie Sanders, huge blowout win over Hillary Clinton back in the primaries, or some of the other issues. But one of the things that Seattle and Washington State as a whole is known for is being a leader in the environment. We just spoke with both Greenpeace International's, our Greenpeace USA's Mark Fogel and Rona Freed, regular contributor from sustainablebusiness.com, about, looking back at 47 years Earth Day celebration yesterday, of course, and, of course, the EPA. What about Seattle and Washington State, their history leading on the environment?
Seattle is very environmentally conscious and always has been. I know one thing you find in Seattle is that even at some of the corporate headquarters, there's a real strong emphasis on recycling here. So there'll be sort of 3 different containers outside of the building. One will say landfill, just to remind everyone that what you don't recycle ends up in a landfill. And then 2 separate kinds of recycling. And then at my building, there's also food waste recycling and yard waste recycling, and it's very, very organized here in terms of how we deal with our waste. But that's just one issue. There's also a move here towards, we've always had electric trolleys and buses. There's also a move towards natural gas and more electric buses, and it's just a very conscious, environmentally conscious place, and I think that's just part of living in Seattle is if you're going to be a good community member of the community here, whether you're a local business or educational institution, that the emphasis on environmental sustainability is very a big top priority. Even the Republicans are green here, Jeff. That's just the way it is. Yeah, it's just part of it.
That's good to know. Finally, they get something. Well, one of the things that I'm always fascinated, having visited Seattle a few times, and particularly when I lived in San Francisco, the thing that really disappointed me, we talked a little bit about this, was the fact that Interstate 5 is your sole highway that goes through the middle of the city there. Of course, it goes all the way up and down the coast in California. And I wonder, and of course, Interstate 90, which comes across from Boston, is also ends there. Those major highways, of course, it doesn't give you the transportation around it. How much of that has been sort of a thorn in the side of environmentalists in Seattle? Because I just think about that major thoroughfare, and of course the clogging that goes on, in downtown Seattle, and of course that permeates with those who don't want to drive in. They buy the expensive apartments. The rent goes up in Mark's neighborhood and neighborhoods around Seattle. So they all connect there. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, those are the kind of issues that we've been talking a lot about, that kind of actually economic displacement and the big move and the economic refugees here in Seattle. But yeah, I-5 cuts right through the middle of the city. So it's a strange design, but that was, I guess the 1950s, it was all about just straight on through. So Seattle is cut down the center by a major interstate. Actually, there's another highway too, which is Aurora, that is old Highway 99, which used to be the major thoroughfare back when there were 2 lanes, going all the way down to California. And that, of course, has its own history with the roadhouses and famous eateries and things along the way. But yeah, it does cut through the center of the city. And Jeff, actually, people don't talk about that as much here as they should. It takes somebody from Boston to point out the fact that, we have a major freeway system cutting the city in half. And it does make it inconvenient when you're trying to travel, say from, the Capitol Hill neighborhood into downtown, because, the freeway cuts right across all of the major streets. So it gets kind of complicated. You can be up on Capitol Hill and look towards downtown, towards the Experience Music Project, or the Pop Art Museum is what Paul Allen is calling that Seattle Center right now. You can see the Space Needle. It looks like you could just go straight down the street you're on and directly to that downtown area. But no, you find that, there's only a few thoroughfares that actually cross the freeway. So it causes congestion and traffic jams. And, we're still using fossil fuels, and you still have cars that are putting out emissions, and the dust from the tires, the rubber dust, and all that is going right through the middle of the city. So it would have been a better design, I think, if they hadn't cut the city in half that way. But, that's what we got, so we've got to learn to deal with it.
Well, that's talking to Mark Taylor-Canfield, of course, here on the Jeff Santos Show, our guy in the West Coast and in Seattle, Washington. The fact is that's happened here. In fact, our good friend Michael Dukakis, the governor, a longtime supporter and guest of the Jeff Santos Show, was involved and cut his teeth as they tried to bulldoze through the immediate suburb of Brookline, Massachusetts, where he represented and still lives. And they did it through the Central Artery in Boston. The neighborhoods here, the North End at the time, and still, although not as anywhere near a population of Italian versus the Irish, and that went right through the middle, dividing both of them, and of course divided those in the West End as well in the 1950s and 60s. And, it destroyed neighborhoods. And it's just really, in the last 10 years or so, the quote-unquote big dig, toppled that. And now we have a way to connect a lot of the different neighborhoods. And it's a much better and more appealing aesthetically as well. And, of course, you look at San Francisco, Dianne Feinstein, Willie Brown stopped, the Embarcadero from going right through North Beach and that great city. And, of course, eventually they knocked it down. The overhead because of the earthquake in 1989 and earthquakes before that. So, finally people are getting a hold of it. But in the end, and I think this goes to the sort of where we are with the whole Bernie Sanders movement. So you knock down these albatrosses that divide people. But what ends up happening is that, as opposed to building affordable housing, you end up, pricing people out of the city. And now they have to find transportation, and if they don't have public transportation, they have to get into a car. And, of course, what does that mean? Not only does it mean more road rage, but it means more pollution. So, it all connects.
And we've been a little bit behind unfortunately, for such a progressive city, we've been behind with the mass transit situation here. And there have been many major mass transit proposals that have been voted down by the public here. I think, Seattle just never wanted to become a major city, a large city, so people were sort of in denial about what was going to happen. But I can tell you that, at least in my neighborhood, officially the big dig here, which is Big Bertha, has finally stopped. I mean, after so many delays and, the largest drilling machine in the world that just suddenly broke down one day for some unknown reason. And there's been a lot of arguments over the environmental impact of that situation. And unfortunately, we've lost some historic buildings. And another thing, Jeff, Seattle is doing a really lousy job at preserving our historic heritage, as far as our architecture goes here. Literally, there is a row house. It's called the Row House Cafe, and it was a row house. The building was built originally in the 1890s, but it's a favorite hangout in my neighborhood, and, we just got the word the other day that they're going to tear it down for another condo.
Wonderful.
So there you go.
Another Donald Trump, develop and destroy.
Yeah. Yeah, and unfortunately the Historic Preservation Board here was 2 votes short of saving it. But even with the historic preservation laws, it only saves some of the exterior of the building. So it's not really a guarantee that you can, preserve, historic buildings. We really need to do much better. I know, when you travel on the East Coast or you travel in Europe, and you see all these beautiful old buildings. Of course, Washington didn't become a state until 1889, so we're a little bit behind.
Yes, you're allowed a little bit, since a lot of the cities and states in the East Coast were founded in the 1600s, and of course. We're part of the 13 colonies. Talking with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield here on the Jeff Santos Show. Phone number to join us, 772-925-8206. You can email me, Jeff, with a J, at revolutionboston.com. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter at Jeff Santos Show. We'll be alert Ron once again will be wishing a happy birthday at the bottom of the hour to not only a relative of Mark, but a few of our listeners as well. Let me ask you this, MTC. We have seen over the last week, this focus by many in the mainstream media to look at this race in suburban Atlanta. Now, of course, we have no problem with the original founding of Starbucks, but it is proliferated to the fact that Starbucks is everywhere in every corner of pretty much every upscale neighborhood in America. And as somebody once described this district in Atlanta as being a yuppie haven for Republicans, who some are pro-choice and some are, accepting of gay rights and others, but really don't care about the $15 minimum wage, which was, of course, first started in the SeaTac area of Greater Seattle, and of course, not concerned about Medicare for all, a big part of Bernie, and I'm wondering if it's got out there that that the Democrats are going to look to this, because there's now a splinter between the DNC and Bernie Sanders. We know the frustration of many people from Seattle. Many people who were Bernie folks trying to get Murray and Cantwell, your 2 senators, to engage, and they didn't. What does it look like from your perspective in the Pacific Northwest?
On the national level, I think, there's been a split in the Democratic Party. One of my songs, my political satire songs, is, it's one big mess, the party's splitting. And it has to do with the progressive wing versus the more corporatist neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party. And sometimes, Jeff, the discussion I've heard up here is it almost seems like 2 different parties, and that reflects something else that people have been talking about too, is this increasing polarization across the country. Because, man, sometimes it seems like 2 different countries too. We're all living in the same United States of America, but wow, the cultural values are so different across the country, and within the Democratic Party itself. So here is, like I said before, this is a state that considers Bernie Sanders to be our president. So I don't know what's going on with you guys in the rest of the country, but this is Bernieville. This is a place where he won every county in the state during the Democratic primaries and won some of those counties by 80 and 90%. So, yeah, there's still a split, and I think people are really frustrated because they look at the national scene and they look at the national organization in the Democratic Party, and people are worried that it could be another setup, that, the progressive wing, if it's ignored, will feel alienated again during the next series of elections and may not show up at the polls, or may end up voting, for, a third party or something. And so it's a really frustrating situation. And in many ways right now, I think people are frustrated with the political system, with the political parties, and they're just trying to figure out, how are we going to get out of this mess? And are our institutions adequate to address some of these issues, including some of the environmental issues? Not to mention, the fact that I live in Seattle, and so any discussions of North Korea or relations with China is very, very important to the people in this part of the country. We have huge trade coming into the port of Seattle from China, and we're very close to North Korea in terms of geography, and we also feel that we're a part of the Pacific Rim, and that so anything that's happening in Asia is very interesting to people here. There's a large Asian, Chinese, Japanese, Korean population in Seattle. So real strong connection to Asia. And so people here have been very nervous lately, Jeff, and been a lot of talk about that too.
Yeah, on the North Korea thing, I mean, obviously, I guess there, according to our experts, Lawrence Korb and others, there are possibilities of a bomb that could hit Seattle, but it's not there yet. But is that a front page story in the Capitol Hill Times and other places, or is it sort of on the back burner kind of thing?
No, it's absolutely a front page story, and so there are articles literally. I know in the Stranger magazine, which is sort of an alternative magazine here. It was literally, will Seattle get bombed? It's literally like on people's minds. And I think some of our political representatives take it very seriously too. We're also surrounded by some rather large military installations, including Trident submarine base in Bangor. We've got the shipyards in Bremerton, McCord Fort Lewis Joint Base. So, yeah, whatever happens too, you see how families around here who have members in the military mobilize in times of crisis like this, where their family members in the military are on alert and things like that. So it affects people. And although I think, people are ultimately thinking positive and are very, very hopeful, that cooler heads will prevail, it's just a very interesting time we're living in. And because at the same time, the big discussion here is also May Day. It's right around the corner, and Seattle has this tradition of these massive protests and then small contingencies of people who show up later in the day and sometimes cause property damage and things like that. So given the mood of the country and the anger, I think, amongst a lot of folks out there, I think I'm going to end up writing an editorial for the Seattle Times just calling for cooler heads on all sides, because there's this issue of, so if there are major protests in Seattle and major confrontations with police where they use the so-called less lethal weaponry again and the pepper spray and the concussion flashbang grenades and all of that, are we going to see more journalists injured? Am I going to have to wear a helmet and a face shield and, body armor out there? And if there is a confrontation with our local law enforcement, how does that direct the energy to what's happening on the national level? Because I think in general, people here are relatively satisfied with our political representation and our political system in Washington State. It's what's happening on the federal level that people are very upset about.
I think that there's something to that, Mark, if I'm sorry to interrupt. I feel that, sometimes, particularly if you're on the West Coast, Washington seems to be so far away and vice versa. And I'm wondering if there is this lack of connection. Well, I know it is definitely in D.C., who only thinks about the bubble of the Beltway. But people can get frustrated, and I think that would hurt, the local folks, because people wouldn't turn out, right?
Well, Seattle is its own bubble, of course, and we're constantly reminded of that when we move around the country. But my thought is just, excuse me, if there are confrontations between protesters and local law enforcement in Seattle, how does that direct energy towards an anti-war movement or stopping the Trump administration from violating the U.S. Constitution or possibly challenging the state's decriminalization and legalization of marijuana? It just seems like energy that gets lost somewhere along the way, because, yes, we are a long ways from Washington, D.C. The protests are done locally in our local environment, our local community. Now, sometimes people do show up in Seattle and cause issues and disruption during those protests that may not actually live in Seattle. So there's that issue too. But it's just an interesting question, Jeff. Is just our local protests against and confrontations with law enforcement here. How is that really going to affect the national level, or will it just be another hyped up corporate news story about burning dumpsters in Seattle again?
Yeah, no, exactly. We've obviously seen a lot of that. The going back to 2000. Mark, obviously such a quick segment, but wanted to play a little happy birthday for your grandfather, and for Rudy and Wayne, some of our longtime callers who are celebrating birthdays this past weekend. Happy birthday to you all. Mark, take care of yourself. We'll be in touch, my friend.
You too, Jeff. See you next time, Ron.
Today in school, I learned a lot. In chemistry, I learned that no one likes me. In English, I learned that I'm disgusting. And in physics, I learned that I'm a loser.
Today in school, I learned that I'm ugly and useless. And in gym, I learned that I'm pathetic and a joke. In history, I learned that I'm trash.
Today in school, I learned that I have no friends.
In biology,
In English, I learned that I make people sick. And at lunch, I learned that I sit on my own because I smell. In chemistry, I learned that no one likes me.
In biology, I learned that I'm fat and stupid. And in math, I learned that I'm trash.
The only thing I didn't learn in school today?
The only thing I didn't learn today.
The only thing I didn't learn
is why no one ever helps.
Kids witness bullying every day. They want to help, but they don't know how. Teach them how to stop bullying and be more than a bystander at stopbullying.gov. A message from the Ad Council.
The Revolution Radio Network.
This is the Jeff Santos Show.
Welcome back. It is the Jeff Santos Show, 34 minutes past the hour. Which means on this Tuesday afternoon, it is time for us to go west. As far west as you can go. Next step, Canada. That's why it's a very special day when we talk to our next guest, freelance journalist. Catch him out on Capitol Hill Times, Daily Coast, and right here on the Jeff Santos Show every Tuesday at 4:30. He's a guitarist, he's a great journalist, and he's a great friend of the program. Mr. Mark Taylor-Canfield joins us live from Seattle. How you doing, Mark?
Hey, Jeff. Thanks so much for that shout-out to the Seattle music scene. And I should also mention Democracy Watch News. I'm a contributing editor for an international news organization, independent news organization. So we need more of those kind of people around. And And Seattle is a great music town, and if folks want to check out my music videos or download some of my free tracks, feel free to check out my work with the Galaxy Machine. We have a bunch of YouTube videos up, and also the Rebel Saints. So you can go to YouTube and SoundCloud and check out what I've been up to. And I'm right in the middle of licensing and publishing a bunch of new music with the Rebel Saints, and also I'm finishing up my novel, which is a film noir private detective story set in Seattle in 1947. And I credit my grandfather for turning me on to those old vintage detective radio plays and movies, and writers like Raymond Chandler, Mickey Spillane, Dashiell Hammett, Damon Runyon, and the rest of those great writers. A lot of them who also wrote the radio plays, which is great. And each one of them had their stories set in their own hometowns, which would be New York City for Mickey Spillane, and then San Francisco, Los Angeles. But I think Seattle needs its own detective story writer, so I'm going to do it.
There you go. You're going to volunteer, man. Good for you, my friend.
I have a friend
You're
who
a busy
does graphic
man.
novels, too. Yeah, my friend who's a great artist, he got a full scholarship to UCLA Fine Arts School. He wants to do a graphic novel with me on it, so we're having a lot of fun. Not getting much sleep, but that's the way it is when you're trying to follow your creative pursuits, you know. You have to stay up all night sometimes in the studio to get anything done, but, you know, that's the life of a musician and a writer, I guess. You know.
You got that, my friend. Well, we got lots to talk about, obviously, as a debate. I want to get your thoughts here on this whole thing going on with WikiLeaks. You know, this back and forth, the threats supposedly that are coming from Hillary Clinton, the drone, Mr. Assange in London there. They wanted to do it at the Ecuadorian embassy where he's been hiding out, and but they didn't want to come out in the balcony because he feared for his life. Some other guy had got caught and shot at nearby the embassy just a few weeks back. And they're going to move it to Berlin, and, you know, it's sort of all kind of in a weird space right now. What is the latest? Because I know you follow a lot of what they do. If you think about it, WikiLeaks is an independent journalist when you think about it. What's your feeling in all this, my friend?
Well, they did talk a lot today at their press briefing on the 10th anniversary of WikiLeaks about their work with journalists around the world. So what they've done is they've opened up a lot of relationships with reporters, with independent and news agencies all across the world. And so a lot of people today in Berlin were expecting another series of revelations on the level of the DNC leaks, but instead Julian Assange and his friends announced that they would be making weekly releases of material, working with journalists around the globe, and he promised to release all of his current information before the November national elections. So some observers were disappointed, and some have accused Assange of grandstanding, but the main issue that the WikiLeaks site at Twitter is posting about is the story of Hillary Clinton allegedly saying or asking why the United States couldn't just use a drone to assassinate Julian Assange. And that revelation has caused a lot of controversy online. And it points out, Jeff, the huge divide in the country over WikiLeaks, because on one side, many democracy advocates laud Assange as a kind of altruistic saint. But on the other side, including the Obama administration and apparently Hillary Clinton, U.S. officials maintain that he is a traitor. And Chelsea Manning also received a similar kind of response from a lot of public officials. So it just points out this huge disconnect, you know. Does it mean to be a democracy? And I do have to point out that the United States is ranked 41st in the world in terms of press freedom, according to Reporters Without Borders, an international advocacy group for journalists. And one of the reasons that they cite in their 2016 World Press Freedom Index is the lack of transparency in our own government, and the fact that it's more difficult for reporters in the United States to get information about the workings of their own government than it is in 40 other countries, including Costa Rica and Namibia, and of course Finland is number one. But it points out this issue of transparency, which is always been a major progressive cause, and it's something that my editor, Dean Edwards at Democracy Watch News, is constantly hitting us over the head with, which is that any progressive movement must embrace transparency. So there you go. Is this release of information an anti-American move by a traitor, or is this a pro-democracy, media democracy movement? And that's where the divide lies, because you have folks on both sides who disagree seriously on this issue about Julian Assange. But today, folks were kind of disappointed that he didn't have any big revelations. And, I watched the press conference. It was very interesting listening to the reporters talk about their relationship with WikiLeaks. And Julian Assange did do a shout-out. He's created also another Twitter site as a sort of protective agency for WikiLeaks to counter a lot of what he calls misinformation about the information they're releasing and how they're releasing it. So it was very clear that he was feeling kind of entrenched in needing support from people around the world, and at the same time, saying that he was going to continue to release the information. But as of today, mostly what people are talking about is this drone assassination suggestion, which, by the way, according to a United Nations official, actually, Dr. Agnes Calamard is a United Nations Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial executions, and in an interview with True Pundit, which is the site that actually first released this story about Hillary Clinton's comment, according to Dr. Agnes Calamard, quote, to do so, the state would have to demonstrate an instant overwhelming, leaving no choice of means and no moment of deliberation necessity. This is not only a very high threshold to meet, it is also impossible to see how that could be used or justified in the case of Mr. Julian Assange. So what she's saying is that Julian Assange, according to this one United Nations rapporteur, she does not think that he is a direct threat to the United States. And just to give a little background on that, apparently one of the reasons that Hillary Clinton was so upset with Assange was the fact that his previous 2010 records release divulged secret U.S. documents about the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq. So she was not happy about that and felt like he shouldn't be walking around with no sense of consequences for his behavior. But that's the story right now, Jeff, and that's what people are talking about online and on Twitter.
Well, it's fascinating stuff, and I don't want to open up the phones to our audience to see what they have to say on this. And start out in Minneapolis with our good friend John. You're next with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield. How you doing, John?
Oh, I'm doing fine. I have to say, I love Seattle, and I think, it's so far to the northwest and the last area of the continental United States that was settled, and there's just something about the place that just seems to favor more creativity, and it's not hidebound. Like, even in the Midwest, there seems like, we've developed a culture of this is the way it's done. And I don't get that impression when I'm in San Francisco or Seattle, and people just seem much more relaxed. I don't know, but maybe it's my own, No,
it's very interesting, John, because being from Minneapolis, not a lot of people have a connection between Minneapolis and Seattle. There's a highly educated population there. Go ahead about the railroad.
Well, the railroad, James Hill's, Great Northern Railroad opened up Seattle or Washington and, parts of Canada to the rest of the country, and linked it with Chicago. And so I think as soon as people discovered that it was much more temperate, they sold the farm and they were on their way. And so it's interesting, there's a lot of families who have connections between, actual connections between the two cities, and the demographics are really similar. There's lots of Scandinavians, I think, and Germans and whatnot. So it's Yeah, it's really interesting. But what I wanted to, talk about, Julian Assange, well, how can he be a traitor? He's not a United States citizen. He's a citizen of Australia, isn't he? Oh, Julian Assange is...
Yeah, he's not American, so yeah, the idea of he's being a traitor to me is crazy, because he's not American.
I think he thinks of himself as a person who is kind of, bringing to the world information about this great empire that we live in. It was supposed to be a democracy. Somehow it got changed. But, the kinds of things, that we do outside of this country and the wars that we've been involved in and whatnot. And I find it helpful, because how am I to assess my own government if everything is cloaked in secrecy? And if anybody dares to, say anything about it, they're thrown in jail under the Espionage Act, even though they're really not doing any espionage. They're actually, bringing forth information that the public, probably should know. I know the ACLU has determined that in a lot of these cases. I just recently saw, the documentary Snowden, and, his, I think what really turned him against being an absolute, patriot was the fact that, this was about power and control. It wasn't about furthering the interests of American ideals and democracy. So, this is where we're at. And, I don't know if Hillary Clinton actually said that. I find it hard to believe. But if that is if there's concrete evidence to suggest that, that's kind of too bad.
Yeah. Well, let me get Mark in on here. Mark, can you hear me? Or first of all,
yes.
Okay. Yeah. John made some interesting comparisons. I wanted to get your thoughts first on what he talked about in terms of Seattle, Minneapolis, and I think what Seattle is a fascinating city with newness. The fact is, it's new ideas. I think Bernie Sanders described the Pacific Northwest as the most progressive part of the country. I agree with him on that assessment, and somebody who's proud to be a New Englander, but really I think the progressive politics that come from places like Washington State, Oregon, Northern California, include our friends in Canada, as British Columbia in there as well, the whole Cascadia thing. Mark, this to me is something that, it's interesting. A Midwesterner who, of course, is originally from New York, and our caller, John, finds fascinating.
I lived almost 20 years in the Southwest, so I kind of, lived in 3 different regions.
All right.
And
very cool. Well, let me get Mark's thoughts on this, John. Mark, go right ahead. Your reaction.
Well, John is correct that the Seattle area, the Puget Sound area especially, is far away from the Washington Beltway. We have a independent idea about how to organize ourselves here, and everything from San Francisco north to British Columbia tends to be very progressive on environmental issues and social justice issues. So that is correct. Now, some people have accused us of living in a bubble up here, but it's easy to do when it's 2,000 miles to the next major city. So it's our own little world, and there are a lot of utopian communities that began here back even in the 19th century. So it does have a long tradition. And just a shout out to my alma mater. I went to the Evergreen State College, which is considered one of the best small liberal arts colleges west of the Mississippi, and it is definitely its own world as well. It's a very environmentally conscious school where and people have made fun of it too, because occasionally kids go to class in bare feet with their dogs or whatever. But it's definitely
as long as they bring some biscuits for the dogs, that's all I care about. And also, because we're limited on time and I want to get a couple of calls in here, what he also said about Julian Assange, is that what you're hearing on the ground from progressives, that, let's not, whether he is a saint or not, he obviously has opened the doors to a lot of things. Look, Debbie Wasserman Schultz will still be DNC chair if it wasn't for him. Mark.
Well, there are a lot of journalists I know around the world who are very happy that this information is being made available to them. And I really needed to say this, though, that Robbie Mooks, who is a spokesperson for the Hillary Clinton campaign, did field some questions about her alleged quote. And honestly, he just deflected the questions and tried to cast WikiLeaks as a Trump ally, which I think is just ridiculous. But, you know, the political scene right now is that none of the high-profile Democrats want to see any more controversy involving Hillary Clinton. So they're going to try to deflect the questions. And he just refused to respond. In fact, he said that he was loath to comment on anything that WikiLeaks was doing at the moment, which in a way he meant to sort of discredit that organization. But at the same time, it shows you that when this kind of information gets out, there is a lack of refutation by those people in power, because how can you refute something that's been documented? And that's one thing I guess you could say in Assange's favor, is that by waiting to release this information, even though he seems to keep telegraphing his punches, as they say, but in hesitating to release information until he has firsthand sources and the original documents, you know, may actually inevitably help the cause, because WikiLeaks is releasing so much information and has over the last 10 years. This is their 10th anniversary today. So they've released so much information that, you know, by making sure that it's accurate and that they can verify it, that's very important if they really want to create this kind of transparency they're talking about. Because once you release information, if it can be discredited, I mean, we saw what happened with George W. Bush and the stories about him shirking his responsibilities in the National Guard, and what happened to Dan Rather when he accepted information from a source that turned out not to be a first-hand source. So you have to be very careful, but at the same time, I think, you know, for people who are looking for some kind of transparency, this is an age of open source material, and there's not much that can be done about it. This is the information age, and information is power. And
that's for sure. John, thank you for the call. I got to run this, but excellent stuff. And just to be aware, folks, tomorrow we may be doing 2 hours due to a hurricane that is approaching the East Coast. Our headquarters is based in Vero Beach, Florida, and we may be doing 2 hours tomorrow because there'll be no show on Thursday. Just a heads up to all of you out there listening to us. We've been doing just 1 hour this week, but we're going to be looking at 2 hours tomorrow, 4 to 6 p.m., as we have done in the past, because of the impending hurricane. South Carolina seemingly is buckling down, evacuating close to 1 million people. Let's go to the phones again. Chicago, Wayne, you're next with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield. How you doing, Wayne?
Hey, how you doing? How you doing, Mark?
Hey, Wayne.
Yes, I think that Julian Assange and Eric Snowden are heroes. Just look at your own phone. You have pre-installed apps that can record your conversations, take pictures of you, record your conversation and send it to a third party, take pictures of you, send it to a third party, your text, messages, email, everything. So I think that is a complete violation of the Constitution. The people in power do not care about the Constitution. They've shredded the Constitution. And here's one more thing. Hillary is mad about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. She wasn't Secretary of State then. So why is she so mad? She's mad because the neoconservative agenda that she's following, along with people like George Bush, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld. You know, that's why she went into Libya. That's why they're trying to hit Syria. Those are, there were 7 countries. Those are 2 of the 7 countries right there. So if they don't stop with this drive to a world domination, we're going to see a nuclear bomb exploding over central United States, knock out the grid, and knock us out for good. That's what I think is going to happen. And hooray to people like Julian Assange and Eric Snowden. They are true human beings, true heroes.
Couple of positive fans of Mr. Assange, Mark. Again, do you find this to be the common thread amongst your among people that you talk with on a daily basis, whether they're in the journalism community or outside of it?
Well, let's hope that Wayne's scenario doesn't come true. I think that transparency in media is going to be one of the future focal points of activism around the world. I mean, we see what's happening in Turkey right now, where they've closed over 20 TV and radio stations, so press freedom there is on the out. I get reports from the Committee to Protect Journalists and Reporters Without Borders, the Reporters Committee to Protect Freedom of Speech every day, and every day somewhere in the world, journalists, bloggers, free speech advocates, netizens is what Reporters Without Borders calls them, are being rounded up, tortured, disappeared, imprisoned, and information is what governments do not want people to have, because it's like a guild. I mean, you know, if you give out your secrets of how you create this structure, then other people can do it, right? And in the United States, you have two major parties that are dominating the political structure, and they certainly don't want alternative or third parties to come along, or some iconoclast like Bernie Sanders to shake it up. But I think what Wayne is saying, and what a lot of progressives in the country and conservatives as well and independents are saying, that there needs to be a change, and that people are not going to go along to get along anymore. They're going to make important moral, ethical choices at the voting booth, and they're not going to buy this nonsense that the media in the United States, the corporate media and the political parties throw on us to try to convince us, you know, that this neoliberal corporatist structure is what's best for the common good. Because in Seattle, even though it's a great place, I can tell you that those folks who are on the professional level and wealthy are doing great. Folks in the middle class and poor are suffering.
You got that right. Mark, I got to run. Wayne, thank you for the call. Again, tomorrow, probably 2 hours, folks. Want to thank Ron Kiter for producing this broadcast, and help from Sarah Billingsley on the web. Our great team of videographers, Gio and Freddie Santori. Of course, Jack Casey and Dee Simpson right here. Stay tuned, folks. My name is Jeff Santos for the best of, including this hour. Right now, it's my time to say, I gotta go!